The Dave Hooker Show, represented by Banks & Jones, Tennessee's trial attorneys. Play to win, banksjones.com.
The Dave Hooker Show. A presentation of Off the Hook Sports. Objective insight, expertise, top guests. Available on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and the Off the Hook Sports app. Download now for free. Also available on offthehooksports.com.
I compute and obey.
Now to Dave Hooker.
Ready.
Welcome to the program, and plenty to talk about. Sometimes it's the little things, like Nick Saban saying, hey, I think I'm done with this career. That's given us plenty to talk about. Sometimes it's the little things that sink in a couple of days later when you start to talk about his potential replacement. And guys, I'm just here to tell you, based off who I've talked to in the interim, since we heard of Nick Saban's announcement on Tuesday is when it leaked news-wise, I don't think that Alabama is in a great shape, a great position to hire a great coach coming up next. I think you're going to see a bit of a dip. So I want to share that news with you from talking to some sources yesterday. Also a big weekend for several former Vols as they head into the NFL and the NFL playoffs. Nick Saban will have an office at the University of Alabama. Is anybody old enough to remember when Philip Fulmer had this? So we're going to discuss this. It's a bad move all around. I don't care how great you are. You do not need to be doing a Jay Leno thing, just hanging around. If you need a coach, I'm right down the hall. I mean, that is exactly what the next coach at Alabama doesn't need. So if you're a Tennessee fan or any other fan, you should root for that. Georgia staffers routinely driving after drinking. This is a scandal. We talked about it at the 3:45 a.m. production meeting. Caleb said, is this a scandal? I said, yeah, I think it is already. So we'll discuss that. And it's just been a bad few days for Mike Norvell. Now Florida State penalized for NIL violations. How do you do that? Caleb, I thought you could hand somebody $100,000 in cash and it be on the Jumbotron at Neyland Stadium, and that wasn't a violation. How do you even get penalized for violations nowadays when you can give guys $8 million before they walk on your campus?
This literally takes the cake. It might surpass the Jeremy Pruitt scandal, because Jeremy Pruitt committed the scandal. Like, we all laugh because it happened like right before NIL became a thing. But Mike Norvell somehow committed the scandal while NIL was a thing. And also, while, by the way, he was a candidate for the Alabama coaching job, which is kind of might hurt him.
Yeah, I mean, you got to wonder if you want to bring somebody in. Let's not forget. I know, again, I sound old, but Alabama had a lot of NCAA issues, individual issues in the 90s. That was the pre-Saban Alabama. When you thought of Alabama, you thought of them staying in trouble. You thought of their coaches that couldn't keep their best interest in their pants, so to speak, or perhaps their worst interest, however you want to put it. I mean, that was the Alabama that I grew up thinking of, the one that Tennessee dominated. And don't think that it can't get back to that, guys. You've seen the decade of dysfunction that Tennessee went through. Nobody would have ever predicted that. It's time for today's tough question, and it is also on the message board to some extent, but really the message board is an extension of how much you would like to see Alabama suffer, which I think everybody, based off the early returns, wants to see Alabama suffer. Today's tough question is now.
Today's tough question. Take a side. Take a stand. The Dave Hooker Show, a presentation of offthehooksports.com.
All right, so I want you to think about this. It's on our YouTube page. Go ahead and hit like and subscribe, please, but take part in the voting. We want you to do that. Turn those notifications on. I think this handsome devil, Caleb Calhoun, might have a piece coming up on Nick Saban that you'll want to partake in. Learn a little bit more about the guy that has made you sleepless at night. So on the page, this isn't today's tough question, but I'll set it up as today's poll question. Who would you like to see get Alabama's job? So you only have these four choices, and I did this on purpose, Caleb. And I love when I make Caleb smile a little bit because he likes the direction I'm going. So these are your four options: Deion Sanders, Lane Kiffin, somebody good. Bama is SEC pillar. I ran out of space for the article, and so Bama is SEC pillar, which I could make a strong argument for. You want the SEC to be good. But then somebody bad, time to suffer, getting 82% of the vote compared to somebody good, 13% of the vote, and 4 apiece for Deion and Lane. Mine would either be Deion or Lane. I've thought about that. Probably Deion, because I just think that would be great theater. And you and I are in it for content, especially when it's dealing with other SEC teams. But that all being said, we've seen Tennessee go through this situation in which they couldn't get the coach they wanted. By the way, how are you, sir? How are you, Kevin?
Oh, I'm good. I'm great. I'm tremendous.
I've talked way too much. I'm sorry. We've seen Tennessee go through it and what it led to. How significant first was Alabama and their dominance to Tennessee and their decade of dysfunction when they couldn't hire a coach that wanted to take on the Alabamas and now Georgias of the world. And there were a lot of guys that had that concern. How much do you think it affected Tennessee's decade of dysfunction? And then I want to switch it up to, could this be a decade of dysfunction for Alabama? Because I'm telling you guys, things change quick. For you younger than me, and I feel like to some extent I'm talking to Caleb. I mean, I've seen it really bad. It's brought to you by Andy Mason, AndyMasonRealEstate.com. AndyMasonRealEstate.com. Best prices, best service in the Knoxville area. 4 decades combined experience in East Tennessee. AndyMasonRealEstate.com for your real estate needs. So how much was Alabama responsible for Tennessee's decade-long struggles on the football gridiron, as the old school cats like to call it?
I'm going to go 30%. I'm going to go 30%. I'm not going to say not responsible at all or not. Alabama, when they're rolling, yes, it's harder for Tennessee. But what also hurts Tennessee is when South Carolina is rolling, when Georgia is rolling, when Clemson is rolling, which all of them were rolling during this time period. And then, well, although I think Clemson was rolling because Tennessee was dysfunctional, but we can have a debate about that. But then on top of that, yes, Tennessee made some really, really bad hires. Now, they had a chance. Here's where Tennessee has itself to blame. I'm going to tell the Mark Richt Georgia story real quick. If you guys remember Mark Richt, Georgia's rolling, but Dave, you remember right when you were your last few years covering the News Sentinel, Georgia kind of had a down spell under Mark Richt, and he was on the hot seat. They had like 2 6-6 seasons in like 2009 and 2010. And
they definitely did. I mean, he was on the hot seat, and I felt like Georgia at the time. You're talking to somebody who called Kirby Smart a terrible hire. I'll admit it, because I thought South Carolina wanted him, and I thought that he pushed Georgia into a corner and said, "You better hire me now, or you're never going to get me." So he kind of forced them into hire. If you remember, a president got on a private plane to tell Mark Richt and all that. So, yeah, they definitely had a dip, definitely had a question. But had Smart not been willing to jump, I think they would have waited another year.
Yeah, so there was a 2009-2010 period where Georgia was 6-6 twice. And then Mark Richt kind of had a bit of a renaissance right before he got fired from like 2011 to 2015, where he was really good. But here's the thing, 2009-2010, that was Tennessee's window. Even though Saban was rolling at Alabama, Tennessee could have cashed in and pummeled Georgia into irrelevancy. But that was the same time period they got burned with the Lane Kiffin move. And so just as Georgia was dysfunctional and Mark Richt was on the hot seat, Tennessee was at its most dysfunctional. So they missed that window. So by the time Tennessee had a chance to kind of stabilize, Georgia was back rolling again. Alabama's dynasty was rolling. And South Carolina had Steve Spurrier, and then Clemson was doing its thing with Dabo Swinney. So I'm going to go about 30% with Alabama, because I will say this, and Wes Rucker tweeted this yesterday, and it's true. Guys, when Tennessee's down and you're trying to rebuild a program, and you enter every season 0-1 because you know you have to play Alabama. No other SEC East team had to enter the season knowing they're going to be 0-1 at that moment. And it was a really, really big deal. And for a period, they entered 0-2 when Urban Meyer was rolling at Florida. And then again, they entered 0-2 for a period when Mark Richt and his Renaissance and Kirby Smart were rolling at Georgia. So I'm going to say that Alabama was 30% responsible, but Georgia was largely responsible too. And then Tennessee itself, we can't pretend that Tennessee didn't make their own mistakes and dysfunctional moves at the same time. Jimmy Haslam forcing Mike Hamilton to hire Derek Dooley, Mike Hamilton hiring Lane Kiffin and just giving him a gigantically terrible contract from Tennessee side.
Yeah, with no significant buyout. I think it was $700,000, which was easy to pay by Southern California. I don't think that Alabama's dynasty really had a big effect on Tennessee's decade of dysfunction, and I'll tell you why. I don't think Tennessee faces off against Alabama in this day and age of recruiting as much as they do Georgia and South Carolina, and especially Clemson, like you pointed out. It's that the chicken or the egg. Tennessee got bad, Clemson took advantage, or Clemson. I don't know which one it is, but anyway, they went head-to-head with them. I also would argue that, especially with a 4-team playoff, that you can lose to Alabama. Theoretically, that would have been our thinking, right? Lose to Alabama or Georgia, and you could still make the 4-team playoff. So I don't think, and obviously that wasn't a part of the decade of dysfunction, so I don't think it was really that big of a deal. As a matter of fact, I'll make the argument right now that I think the Alabama dynasty and the Alabama way that they beat people on national TV during the playoffs, and I still remember that Miami game at the Chick-fil-A kickoff or whatever. It looked like they didn't belong on the same field. I think that helped Tennessee. I think if you put Alabama is, do you ever go to Costco? I've been smart enough not to get the card because I know that I'll spend too much money. But do you ever go to Costco, Caleb? Have you ever been to one?
Oh, I love Costco. I'm a regular Costco shopper.
Do they not have the biggest, most bad TV right in the front of the
Always.
television section? It's like, how could you pass that one up? So I think a lot of people, a lot of college football fans may have passed up Alabama because they're not Alabama fans, but they appreciated the dynasty. That's a storyline. That's a good storyline. Same thing with the Patriots. I think the NFL's lacking a storyline. I think Alabama actually helped Tennessee stay relevant in the decade of dysfunction. I know that sounds insane as Tennessee tried to stub their toe at every opportunity, but if not for Alabama over the past 17 years, you're not talking about the SEC as being the preeminent conference in college football. You're not.
I disagree with you on that. I think the SEC had already become the preeminent conference before Saban took over. If you remember, Dave, when did the SEC become the preeminent conference? It was 2006 Florida, Ohio State, when Florida beat the brakes off Ohio State in the national championship game. And what happened the next year? A 2-loss LSU team with Les Miles, because Les Miles he campaigned to get into the title game because he said, we haven't lost a game in regulation this year. That was literally his argument, guys. Go look it up. And that got LSU in the title game, and they blew out Ohio State again. Those 2 years, 2006 and 2007, and 2007 was Saban's first year, but that's what made the SEC the preeminent conference, was the fact that two different SEC teams blew out the Big Ten champion, who was number one in the nation at the time, and proved that they were on a separate class. Now, Alabama took it to another level, but I think that foundation had already been laid by Urban Meyer. And you could say still Nick Saban, because what Les Miles did at LSU was because of the recruits that Nick Saban brought in years before. However, I'm still going to give Nick Saban's LSU tenure credit. I think Nick Saban's Alabama credit. I think Nick Saban benefited at Alabama from the SEC's rise under Meyer and Miles. And then maybe he did take it to another level, but
a whole nother level. Now, we're not talking about a championship more, Caleb. We're talking about double the amount of championships that Urban Meyer won. Triple, actually.
Yes, but okay, from 2006 to 2010, SEC won it 5 years in a row. Before the Alabama dynasty took off, Alabama won one of those, but Florida won two, LSU won one, and Auburn won one. And so it wasn't just Nick Saban in Alabama. Now, the 2010s, you got me. 2010s was all Nick Saban in Alabama, and then it was Kirby Smart in Georgia, and then it was obviously LSU 1 year with Coach O and Joe Burrow and Steve Ensminger and Joe Brady.
But see, Caleb, you're forgetting about that 2009 season. Tennessee, under a first-year head coach, almost went to Tuscaloosa and won. So there wouldn't have been a decade of dominance had Lane Kiffin never left for Southern California.
No, I agree. I'm with you. I said it's partially Alabama, but it's still Tennessee could have overcome it because of the fact if they had kept stuck with the right coach. I'm with you on that. And by the way, Alabama in 2009 was not as loaded as they would be. Saban had only 2 number 1 recruiting classes on that roster, guys. Okay. Typically his roster
Only 2. I thought
Typically,
that was still a pretty loaded team. That's back when he'd get really conservative at halftime. Was I thought
yes,
would open the door for Lane to.
That was the difference between. But the 2010s Alabama, usually of a 4-year roster, 3 of them were number 1 recruiting classes, and then 1 was a top 5 recruiting class. So it was a little bit of a drop off for Nick Saban in 2009. He had Alabama where he wanted them at, but Dave, history is somewhat on your side because I'll give you an example. Bear Bryant was rolling hard in the 60s, and Doug Dickey was still doing well at Tennessee during that time. Wallace Wade and Frank Thomas were doing well at Alabama in the 30s and 40s, but that didn't stop Robert Nealon from being very successful at Tennessee. But if you go to the 80s, Johnny Majors really didn't elevate Tennessee until Bear Bryant retired. And then he didn't get him to the next level until Vince Dooley retired. So it took Bear Bryant and Vince Dooley stepping down before Tennessee could really hit its only really elite run of the modern era of college football from 89 to 2004. And the minute Georgia got competent again with Mark Richt, it kind of fell off. And then it's no secret that Nick Saban gets there in 2007. Really, the dysfunction for Tennessee starts in 2008.
Yeah, but they were still in the same playing field in 2009. So still in the same playing field with a chance to win the game. So to me, that's not, you still have some leftover talent from Fulmer. You're not going to go off the table completely if Lane Kiffin stays as head coach. You might have another blip because the talent slough off when but they wouldn't have had as bad of a talent drop off because those guys wouldn't have left for the 2010 class. They would have had by the number that went to Southern California. If I'm looking at Alabama and their dynasty as far as the reasoning behind Tennessee's decade of dysfunction, I've got it even less than that. I've got it at about 10. I don't think it's been that significant. Now, if this was Georgia that was doing it in the East, we'd be having a different discussion. But also, Tennessee just doesn't match up against Alabama a lot in recruiting. Portions of the program brought to you by Campbell, Cunningham, Taylor, and Haun. Enjoy life better when you see better. Local vision service for LASIK, cataract surgery, and regular eye examination. ccteyes.com. That's ccteyes.com. Campbell, Cunningham, Taylor, and Haun. And they're local. They're fantastic. So certainly check them out. All right. So I did a little bit of calling around yesterday, and I want to get into the possible Saban replacements and who they think they can get. But first, it's time for 4 downs. And I don't know what happened. I thought that my guy Caleb Calhoun was high on Tennessee. I thought that he was sometimes high on LSU. But now he just loves him some Nick Saban. I don't know what's going on, but maybe it's just a Freaky Friday as we get to 4 downs right now.
4 Downs brought to you by Dynasty Spas, the most comfortable spas made in the United States of America, right here in East Tennessee. Drop in for the all-new showroom in Athens. Dynasty Spas, perfect for all 4 seasons. 4 Downs, presented by Off the Hook Sports.
All right, let's take a look at how Nick Saban handled his exit from the University of Alabama. It was, I think, a spur of the moment decision to some extent, but it also seemed to be thought out. So we'll jump in the hot tub with Coop. Coop, what should people do if they like the program?
Cooper Mays here. Hit like and subscribe.
Thank you. First down, Coop.
Coop here. First down.
Nick Saban acknowledged he couldn't do everything he wanted to do as a coach. So he didn't try to stay on them while giving up responsibilities. We have seen coaches do that in the past. We've seen other coaches. David Cutcliffe is the one that comes to mind the soonest, be asked of change coaches and end up getting fired. So I don't think it was ever to that point with Nick Saban, nor would it have ever been. You're not going to have the University of Alabama walk in his room and say, you got to make these changes, correct?
Correct. You're not. What the respect I gave with Nick Saban here, and I want to bring up 2 names. One Tennessee and one a little larger. I don't like when coaches stay on as figureheads without doing the work necessary as coaches because they want the credit for the wins. And Nick Saban, who wants to be very hands-on in everything he does, clearly decided it's not right for me to try to get credit for wins as a head coach when I can't do everything that I used to be able to do as a head coach. Dave, you have told me that Philip Fulmer told you he wanted to step back and become more of a CEO and delegate the coaching task to his staff in 2006 and 2007.
Yes.
That's not right. I don't think that's appropriate. But however, at least Fulmer was doing some work as a CEO and a recruiter. Joe Paterno literally sat on his hands for the last 15 years as head coach. Take the Jerry Sandusky thing out of it, which is actually kind of evidence that Joe Paterno was very hands-off. But Joe Paterno did not do any coaching at all. He sat on his hands and he let his staff do the work, and then he took credit for the wins and pretended he was holier than thou. And he didn't even recruit at the end. I think what they would do, Dave, I don't know if you know the story, the staff would go recruit, and they would have Paterno Skype the recruit to close the deal, basically. And that was... It was despicable. And quite honestly, Bobby Bowden was doing the same thing at Florida State his last 7 to 8 years too. And Florida State kind of, I think, secretly forced him out. I don't know if you know more about that than I do, but I had read some reports that they kind of basically were like, yeah, you got to step out. You're not really coaching. Nick Saban did what was, I think, righteous, which is to say, I could still do some things as a head coach. But if I'm delegating head coaching responsibilities to other people just so I can stay on in this role, that's not fair. That's not appropriate. And I should step down because of that. Ladies and gentlemen, in life, that's what you do. If you can't do all the responsibilities that you want to do in your role, you shouldn't have that role. And Nick Saban knew that. And I respect him for stepping down because of that.
All right. What down, Coop?
Cooper Mays here. Second down.
Okay. Should Nick Saban still be involved in college football, what would be his best role? Mine's pretty easy, and nothing against David Cutcliffe, but I would watch out for my seat in the SEC office. I think that Nick Saban should be employed by the SEC, and I know a lot of Tennessee fans and other fans out there wouldn't like that. A guy that may have a vested interest with the ear of the commissioner, theoretically. But I don't think Nick Saban looks at Alabama as much more than just a great job that worked out really, really well. I don't think he would use any influence he might have in the SEC office simply to benefit Alabama. A lot of people are going to say I'm full of it, but that's my take on that. So what would his best role be? Let me ask you that, Caleb Calhoun. I remind you, 4 Downs brought to you by our friends at Dynasty Pools and Spas. You've got to check them out. You can go to dynastypoolsandspas.com or stop by their just incredible showroom in Athens. They can deliver all kinds of discounts for you. We'll tell you more about those as we go along. Dynasty Pools and Spas in Athens. They are phenomenal. Also with all the chemicals that you need for your pool and or hot tub that you can pick up right there. All right, what do you think his role will be? What would be his best role?
I think his best role would be, look, I'm one day the SEC and the Big Ten are going to combine and form a conference, a super conference, a super league, and Nick Saban should be the commissioner of that league. I think Nick Saban, I watched his interview with Rece Davis. Now, let me stop here for a minute. Nick Saban, when he was coaching, he was full of you-know-what when he was ranting about the competitive imbalance that NIL created. Because Nick Saban, being at Alabama is its own competitive imbalance, and I don't think you complained about that your whole time at Alabama. However, I can't blame him for that. His job is to look out for Alabama. When people, don't you agree, Dave? It's stupid when you call a coach hypocritical for looking out for their program. That's their job, is to look out for the best of their interest of their program, regardless.
But I don't think Nick Saban would have a problem with setting aside the best interest for Alabama for the best interest of the conference. You do realize that, especially your job, but maybe my job is one that he would not accept, right? I mean, he doesn't want to be the commissioner of this new college football mega conference, and he doesn't even want to do what I did, which just means have an office in Birmingham like David Cutcliffe has. You realize he doesn't want to do, nor would he do either of these things. We're going to talk about what he's going to do, but he wouldn't do either of these.
He did say in an interview with Rece Davis yesterday that he wants to be involved in college football and addressing these issues, though. And I do believe him on that. And okay, I think Nick Saban has. This
is where I got a problem, though. So tell me when you're done, and I'm going to share my problem with you.
I think Saban is actually kind of like Peyton Manning is for the NFL, which if you pay attention to Peyton Manning more than anything has a deep love and care for the future of the NFL, of the game. and loves the game and the future of the game more than anything, I think Saban has a deep love for college football and is very, very, very invested personally in the long-term health of the sport. I do believe him on that.
Agree or disagree with this? What down, Coop?
Tennessee center Cooper Mays here. Third down.
So Nick Saban's going to have an office at the University of Alabama. This is good for Tennessee and Alabama's rivals, or really good for Tennessee or Alabama's rivals? There's no bad or average. And I'll go ahead and answer my own question. It's really good. You want the dude hanging out. You want Jay Leno hanging out the whole time, looking over Conan O'Brien's shoulders. I wouldn't have delivered that joke like that. That's what you want. I wouldn't have called that play on fourth down. That's what you want. Tennessee tried to do this with Philip Fulmer when they fired him. He had an office where they paid a secretary to drive his mail to his house. It will not work. You do not want the former coach in the building. You want him out the door. So Nick Saban has the power, has the leverage. He's going to have an office, I guess, on the 50-yard line of Bryant-Denny Stadium. Where's the office going to be yet, Caleb? Because this is the dumbest idea for Alabama and the best idea for those that want to beat Alabama that has ever been created in the history of modern man. I don't want to overstate it.
No, I agree. I totally agree. You don't want this. By the way, and I'm going to give you guys a little bit of history lesson. I don't have to go back as far as Fulmer. Robert Nealon.
Nor Leno. People are ripping my Leno. Stay tuned for Conan. How's that? Go ahead.
Yeah. So Robert Nealon, after he retired, Dave, in 52, he took over as athletic director. Robert Nealon hired his own chosen successor in Harvey Robinson and fired him 2 years later. And then he hired Bowden Wyatt, who was there for 10 years. They were all trying to run. Robert Nealon, as athletic director, just hired coaches who would run exactly what he ran, like including the X's and O's, the single wing offense and his defensive schemes. But he was basically head coach stepping back as athletic director. And it actually wrecked Tennessee into the late 50s and early 60s. And Tennessee, I don't want to get morbid, Tennessee didn't restore itself until Robert Nealon died and Doug Dickey came in and moved Tennessee past the Nealon era. Okay? Look up at history. Robert Nealon's presence strung Tennessee into some depths of irrelevancy in the late 50s, early 60s. And
as SC Scout guy, which I want to address, Steve Spurrier has an office at UF and is apparently there all the time. Two things. Steve Spurrier is not the kind of guy that's going to get overly involved with something unless he's getting credit for it. Okay, so he's not going to monkey around with the football department unless he's getting credit for the success. And he doesn't really like the detractors when he loses. So that's different. Plus, he's done it at another place, and he is older. I know they may be the same age. I don't know if you can look up Steve Spurrier's age. It may be about the same age as him.
Steve Spurrier's older than Nick Saban. Steve Spurrier's 70. He was born in 1947, so I believe he's 77 now.
And an older. If you've seen Steve Spurrier walk around, he had a really bad hip. He's an older 70s-ish person than Nick Saban is. You get the feeling that Nick Saban could coach for another 5 years if somebody laid a gajillion dollars on the table.
But the shadow of Spurrier is over you at Florida. That could be a reason they're struggling. I mean, let's just be honest.
Well, they got to go with Urban Meyer.
They did, but that was when Spurrier was at a rival school, not when he was retired and the field was named after him. And also, Urban Meyer that's another shadow, though. The problem with Florida is this, and this is the truth. Florida is not going to be that intriguing unless they're running a creative offense that is ahead of the curve. Let's be honest. That's how they win, right? Historically, they're always running a offense. Josh Heupel would have been a perfect fit at Florida. He's not going there now, but that's what they need, isn't it? Someone who brings offense like that.
So I hadn't thought about that. You're suggesting that Steve Spurrier cast a shadow over that program as well, and that's why they've struggled?
Yes, he cast a shadow of Florida needs an offense that's ahead of the curve to be successful. That's why Will Muschamp failed. That's why Billy Napier's failing. Neither of these are creative minds. That's why Jim McElwain failed. Well, Jim McElwain also just isn't smart. But okay, besides that, that's why these coaches were failing. Yes, because the shadow that Steve Spurrier cast of having an elite Florida wins with elite offensive production that's entertaining to watch. They do. They have to be entertaining.
Well, I agree they haven't hired the right coach. I don't know that it's because Steve Spurrier has an office there. I'd be more afraid of the coach that just got fired like in the Philip Fulmer situation, or that just retired, like in the Nick Saban situation, having an office. That to me is a little bit different. Fred Stryker here asked, does anyone, and I loved you on Airplane. I rewatched that the other day. That's when I developed my drinking problem. Throws in his face. Fred says, does anyone think that Hype has been contacted? Let's take a quick second before we get to fourth down. Do I think he's been contacted? No. But do I think Alabama knows if he would be interested or not? Yes. And they all have the same agent. I mean, Jimmy Sexton knows what everybody knows. It's like going to the Wizard of Oz and pulling back the
Greatest
curtain.
agent in history.
I mean, what does he not know? What could he possibly not know that could be holding up a potential Alabama?
Uh-oh, I believe we have lost Dave Hooker. Dave, are you on? Or is it me? Message board, tell me if it's Dave or me. Tell me who has frozen. I believe Dave Hooker has frozen. We are going to try to get this fixed, this situation called. Technical difficulties, guys. I'm going to call Dave Hooker on my phone real quick, okay? We're going to have a little bit of fun here. I'm going to give him a call and see what's going on. Please leave your message for 8. Okay, Dave's power has gone out. Dave is having some issues. We're going to try to get him back on in a second. But we are talking about, will Josh Heupel be hired at Alabama, or have they contacted Josh Heupel? It sounds like they may just know Josh Heupel is not going to be interested. And I would just tell you guys, we talked a little bit about this yesterday, but Josh Heupel, Alabama is not a job. You don't want to leave Tennessee for Alabama right now. You just don't, given what's happening in this moment. So, reading some message boards, Dave just got raided by the FBI. Nick Saban shut him down. All right, I believe Dave is trying to get back on now. But Nick Saban, I love that. Heupel will never betray Tennessee. That is very true. Dave, you're dark. What's going on?
We heard some. I don't know if you can hear me. Can you hear me or not, Caleb?
Yeah, I can hear you. Everything okay?
Not, Caleb.
I can hear you. I can hear you, Dave.
So,
I can hear you.
We had some sort of that sounds like a tree fell or something, and we've lost power. So here we go. Yeah, Dave getting swatted. Do we want to do this version with me, where I can be on the?
Let's do it. I can do the commercials. I can set everything. I can set up the board and everything. So are you?
I'm just trying to prop up my. Yeah, trying to. Am I reporting from Iran? No. By candlelight, that's what it is. We've got a North Down brought to you by Dynasty Pools and Spas. So we got to this a little bit. That's Nick Saban having an office. I think it's a historically bad idea that can only go south. What did you think? Do you think?
Well, that was third down, actually, but I'm with you. It's a historically bad idea. We agree. Having your fingerprints all over the program like that is never a good sign. You talked about Philip Fulmer. It didn't work. Robert Nealon being athletic director didn't work. And that's the other thing. I don't think it's good to hire a former legendary head coach as athletic director either, Dave. I don't know how you feel about that. And I'm not just talking about Philip Fulmer. I'm talking about anybody that was a great coach. Like they're going to hire somebody that tries to replicate what they did, aren't they? And you just don't want that shadow over the program.
Agreed. And it's on our YouTube page. Again, sorry for the technical difficulties. Some large something fell on the house, but apparently I'm told by the fellow hookers in the home that everything's okay. So that's good. Who would you like to get Alabama's? I'll just make this fourth. Deion Sanders, Lane Kiffin, somebody good. Bama is an SEC. Had time to suffer. Put a hat on for a second. Don't be your analyst hat, but Caleb, of those four and your content hat, what would you pick?
Well, okay, if you are actually, we need a fifth down. We need a Colorado down because I wanted to ask a question about Nick Saban too after this. But if as an analyst and a fan of college football, I told you this yesterday. I want Lane Kiffin in Alabama. I want Lane Kiffin in Alabama, and I want his Leo DiCaprio standards of no woman over the age of 25 because I want the stories of Lane Kiffin chasing Alabama co-eds. That's what I want, okay? But probably not going to get that. If you're Tennessee, I'll tell you guys right now, you want Kalen DeBoer hired at Alabama. I'm just going to tell you, he's an overrated coach. He's massively overrated, and he'll get Kalen DeBoer is the type that you'll believe in him for 3 or 4 years. He'll get you a top 10 season, but he won't get you much else, and you will not be happy about it. And so if you're Alabama, you'll love it at Tennessee. I don't think Kalen DeBoer is that good. He is riding the coattails of success he had at the Division II level, but he was following another legendary coach who had the same success. So Kalen DeBoer, ready for this? He's Butch Jones. He is Butch Jones. Alabama will be getting Butch Jones if they hire Kalen DeBoer.
Well, he made it to a national championship game. And yes, crazy wind is coming across the state, Fred. I know because I just lost my power.
So, yeah, but, if Butch Jones stayed at Cincinnati, he might have backed into a national championship game with this college football playoff. Okay, just because he had inherited a roster Brian Kelly built. And you never know. Something like that could have happened. Now, my fifth down question to you, Dave, is beyond football, what should Nick Saban do if he doesn't want to do football and he doesn't want to retire and he wants to keep working? And he said he's going to keep working.
I don't know what that dude does. See, because I heard a rumor in the corporate world that he would retire last year because he didn't sign a long-term deal, an endorsement deal. And the first thing that somebody told me, he said, I'm just telling you, this is what I'm hearing. What in the world he would do, knows to do. That is all he knows to do. What does I don't know. I mean, I don't know what I love my job and what we do. I don't know what I would do if I retired tomorrow. Probably wouldn't be good.
Can I tell you something crazy? Can I tell you something crazy? And
what if you got some crazy retirement plan that I don't want to be aware of?
This is very, very unlikely, but I'm just going to throw this out there. Nick Saban, one of his best.
Oh man, it's like, you're going to put together like a fire concert, aren't you? Like
no! Just hear me out. Just hear me out. Just hear me out. Hear me out, okay. Dave. Hear me out. Nick Saban's one of his best childhood friends was longtime West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin, who is considered like the most centrist member of Congress, who started a group called No Labels Party. There's rumors that they're recruiting a No Labels Party candidate to run for president. And I'm just saying, if Joe Manchin started this party, it's supposed to be some centrist party. He's one of Nick Saban's best friends. Nick Saban retires in an election year. Are they recruiting Nick Saban to run for president, Dave?
Possibly. And somebody said that you're I didn't do that, ball fan. For life, you're one of the good guys here. I will definitely get you on there. How about Nick Saban and Bill?
No, I want them being president and vice president.
Get through it?
Bill Belichick.
I'm not opposed to that. Do you know where they stand politically?
I think. Well, if Nick Saban is friends with Joe Manchin, Nick Saban is probably some like centrist type of Democrat, Republican, like centrist type. I don't know which one he leans. So I don't know. I don't know what his political leanings are, but I don't think he has much of an ideology. So honestly, in that way, that's probably a good thing. So I'd consider him for president. So I'm just saying.
There you go. All right.
He'd be young.
Why somebody with a monstrous voice in college football thinks Tennessee's not even a top 25 program. Is that the type of voting that the NCAA should take a look at? The Blair Witch continues after this with Caleb Calhoun.
Sun, sand, and salt water, the beach is a very relaxing place. Unless you wear contacts. Ow! Open your eyes to the best the beach has to offer with LASIK vision correction from Campbell Cunningham Laser Center. Ah.
Sports Treasures in North Knoxville is one of the South's largest sports cards and memorabilia dealers, featuring over 10 million sports cards from vintage to modern. Sports Treasures carries a full line of hobby boxes, singles, autographed memorabilia, Tennessee Vols collectibles, fan cave decorations, and so much more. See a museum full of collectibles at Sports Treasures, 4819 North Broadway in Fountain City, and Sports Treasures on Facebook. Sports Treasures, where the real sports fan goes to shop.
Have you seen the latest TriStar Hats Co. product?
TriStar Hats Co.? What's that?
You know, those really cool hats, shirts, tumblers, and even license plates with 3 stars like the official Tennessee flag and stripes like the American flag. Pretty patriotic if you ask me.
Ah, gotcha. Seen those. Those are cool. Where can I get them?
Simple. TriStarHatsCo.com. And if you order now, there's 10% on any order $50 or more. Plus, use the promo code HOOKED.
With the promo code HOOKED, you get 10% off. That's hooked.
And don't forget free shipping with any order over $50. Stock up at TriStarHatsCo.com. That's TriStarHatsCo.com. There are plenty of wannabes out there, so make sure you go to TriStarHatsCo.com for the best quality and customer service.
Will do, and I'll be sure to use the promo code HOOKED. That's hooked when I do, to save an additional 10% off. TriStarHatsCo.com.
TriStar Hats Co. is a trademark of TriStar Hats Co. LLC. Any use without express written consent is prohibited.
Dave, you're muted. Dave, you're muted. Dave, we can't hear you. We can't hear you, Dave. Dave, you're still muted. You're still muted, Dave. Dave, you're muted. Still can't hear you.
All right, so what are you
I
laughing
hear
at,
you now.
Caleb? You laughing at me?
We couldn't hear anything you just said. You were muted the whole time right there.
Oh, sorry. The show represented by Banks and Jones. Banks and Jones. Other lawyers say they'll go to trial. They won't. They're phenomenal. It's Banks and Jones. Banks and Jones goes to trial for personal injury or criminal defense as well. So, yes, if you're just tuning in now, I look like I'm doing the Blair Witch Project as the power. There was some huge bang and the power has gone out in the studio. So we just figure we'll roll on because that's how we do. There's no question about that. All right. This to me is officially worth a what the 8? And that is Rece taking Tennessee off of his final top 25 vote. Is this bias? Jim Mora did as well. There's, I think, a more reasonable explanation for Jim Mora. Let's start with Mora before we get to Rece Davis, who I didn't know for years. I thought that people, when they got into the profession of journalism, set their fandom aside. Apparently, that hasn't been the case all these years that I thought that, because Rece Davis is pretty open Tennessee fan. Or I'm sorry, an Alabama fan.
I'm sorry, what was the last thing you said?
So, Rece Davis is a pretty big Alabama supporter, right?
Yes, he is an absolute pretty big Alabama supporter. Look, I'm not here to cast aspersions on Nick Saban, but there was a reason Rece Davis got that exclusive yesterday to talk to Nick Saban first before anybody else. And it's because he runs cover for Alabama, the program. I'm just going to be honest with you guys.
What do you mean by running cover? And then your thoughts on the message board. Do you agree with Caleb in this regard? Because this is a guy who has a huge voice. This is not Bob who works at the Arkansas Democrat Gazette whose vote. This is a guy who has a huge voice Saturday morning and beyond.
I just think he speaks glowingly of Alabama, and he has consistently in the past gone against Alabama rivals. I will give you an example. And before he was on College Game Day, he used to remember the College Game Day final with Mark May and Lou Holtz back and actually it was Mark May and Trev Alberts before that years ago. Rece Davis, when there was the 2004 debate about Auburn, Oklahoma, and USC, and when they all three were undefeated and who should get left out of the national championship game, Rece Davis, as the guy who's not the analyst, the guy who's the host of the show, vocally said it's clear cut Auburn should be left out. And that kind of sprungboard, that jockeying kind of was a springboard to AP voters to kind of leave Auburn down at number 3. And the way he went about it had a lot to do with hinting at his Alabama fandom. I'm just going to put that out there, the way he did it. And so that was kind of embarrassing when he did that. And so, yes, I do think he runs cover for Alabama and serves as an attack dog on their rivals.
Okay, well, let me ask you this then. Should he be allowed, given his role? He is a media member, yes, but he's also a part of the show. So, media member to me is somebody clowns and the elephants, and they tell you what they do. They are not a clown or an elephant. He show week in and week out. Should he or anybody else in his role be able to vote? I mean, they're part of the show. There's a line that is crossed there.
There is. I don't think it matters as much anymore because the AP has no bearing on who wins national championships since college football has the official college football playoff selection committee. And it's not like he's on that committee. So I think it's okay. I just think it's a bad look in general. I think it's a bad look. And I think it's a bad look when you leave people off. And I mean, I say this. I mean, Dave, didn't they strip away Steve Spurrier's coach's vote just because he kept voting Duke in the top 25? Because out of appreciation that they gave him his first job. And I think they actually
I don't
they either
remember
stripped
that. I remember.
We lost Dave again. Well, you guys tell me. I believe that Steve Spurrier was stripped of his coach's vote. Either that or he was told he can't do it again because every preseason when he had one, he would give Duke a vote for the top 25. And his reasoning was Duke gave me my first job and I have a lot of respect for them because of that. And out of that, I'm going to vote them in the top 25. That's really where this came from. I think I think what Rece Davis and Jim Mora Jr. did was quite honestly a travesty. And I do think to a certain degree, I'm not as opposed to someone being biased or homer for a school or rooting for a school, even if they're covering things. My issue is, and this is my real issue. My issue is if you let that homerism or bias cloud what's rational. So if Rece wants to be an Alabama fan, that's fine. If he wants to root for Alabama, that's fine. But you can't seriously then not put Tennessee in their final top 25 rankings if you look at the top 25 this year. If Jim Mora Jr. has issues with Josh Heupel, that's fine. I got no issues with that. If he doesn't like how that ended with the way Tennessee beat UConn this past year, okay. Leaving Tennessee out of the top 25 is not a serious thing to do. There is nothing rational about that. And this is the big issue with polls and ratings and things like that. I was at SEC Media Days earlier this year, guys, and I want to bring up a fact that you guys may not know this, but Vanderbilt received votes to win the SEC. Now, college football, and I encourage you guys to watch my history videos on how college football crowned a national champion years ago. College football as a sport has more than any other sport depended on media members to up the credibility of the sport. Let's just be honest. College football has depended on media members to up the credibility of the sport for a long time now. It is a sport that was propped up by voters and people like that. So college football, the role of a media member is much more serious than it is in other sports. And to give troll votes just for fun really cheapens what made college football great. I'm just going to be honest with you guys. Really cheapens what made college football great. And so because of that, I have to be honest with you, what Rece Davis did and what Jim Mora did are scandalous. I mean, they are straight scandalous. I don't care how you feel about programs. You need to be honest with your votes and you need to take these things very seriously. And this cheapens everything. It's the reason the Baseball Hall of Fame has been cheapened now, because people have not taken their votes in the Baseball Hall of Fame seriously. And I'm glad, at least with the AP poll, we get the names of people and how they vote. We need the names of people who decide to vote like this in college football. I mean, in the Baseball Hall of Fame. And so I think it's very, 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 if you voted for Vanderbilt to win the SEC, your name should be out there. Your name should be out there. You should be humiliated, so nobody ever takes anything you write seriously again, quite honestly. Okay? You should have to put yourself by everything you do. And if you're an AP voter, same thing. And this is, and by the way, Meat Drinker's right. And they wonder why the general population doesn't trust the media. That's a great point, Meat Drinker. It's true. How can you sit there and say, we're media members and we need to be respected and yada, yada, yada. But you have people in your industry that do stuff like that vote Vanderbilt to win the SEC at the beginning of the year, that leave Tennessee out of the AP top 25. I mean, this happens all the time, and it's absolutely ridiculous. Now, I understand politicking if it's rational. Okay, here's an example of politicking that I can't hate on. In 2011, when the coaches poll had a say in the BCS rankings, and Nick Saban had a vote in the coaches poll, and it came down to Alabama or Oklahoma State being number 2 or number 3 to play LSU for the national title. Nick Saban voted Alabama number 2, and he voted Oklahoma State down at number 5. That looked bad. However, before people get upset about that, Stanford also was a one-loss team that year, just like Oklahoma State. And so Saban voted Stanford ahead of Oklahoma State. And yes, that was politicking, but it wasn't crazy. There was a rational reason to put Stanford ahead of Oklahoma State. You could make the case legitimately that Stanford was better. You could also make the case that Oregon was better because they won the Pac-10 or Pac-12, excuse me. No, it was the Pac-10 at the time. So because of that, even though Oregon did have 2 losses, there was a political way you could get away with putting Alabama at number 2 and Oklahoma State number 5. Rocky Top Tom brings up the point that year, and it's kind of interesting. Let's be honest, 2011 is a freak context, which turned out to be entertaining, even though principally Oklahoma State should have been in. I wanted Oklahoma State to get in too, Rocky Top Tom, but on principle, because I had the principle of you need to win your conference to play for the national title if it's only 2 teams playing for the national title at the time. But I grudgingly admitted that Alabama and LSU were the 2 best teams in college football right there. Right then. So I understood why they did that. I didn't like it at the time. I had to come around to it. So that's kind of the big deal with that. Guys, I don't think we're going to be able to get Dave back on. So I'm just going to move on and try to continue the show the best I can. I want to talk a little bit about Jerod Mayo and some former Vols, because this is a great story. For those who don't know, Jerod Mayo was named head coach of the New England Patriots this morning. He's going to replace Bill Belichick. It's a great story for Jerod Mayo. Dave, I wish he was back on because he was actually great at covering Jerod Mayo. But let's just talk a little bit about Mayo. Mayo played at played at Tennessee from 2005 to 2007. He was the outside linebacker in 2005 and 2006. Switched over to middle linebacker in 2007. Had to move. Became an all-SEC, should have been all-American linebacker at middle linebacker in 2007. Picked it up really quickly. Very smart player. So, Jerod Mayo getting the job at New England, it's a pressurized job. It's a pressurized situation. He has to follow Bill Belichick. But a lot of what he does will depend on the roster New England assembles. I don't know if he's going to be the GM or not. Belichick, I think Belichick's career was undone by the fact that Bill Belichick was not a good GM. So Jerod Mayo getting the job as head coach of the Patriots is just an incredible story. And it's one of the best stories you could have. And it kind of leads me to my talking point a little bit about who, the best. There's a lot of former Vols in the NFL right now and in the playoffs. And I want to go to the message board a little bit. If you're a Vol fan, who do you root for the most? How much are you rooting for Mayo as a head coach going long-term? And how much are you rooting for former Vols in the playoffs this year? And I just want to go down the list. There are the former Vols in the playoffs this year. Derek Barnett is with the Texans. Jawan Jennings is with the 49ers. He has had a concussion, but he's coming back. Cedric Tillman is with the Browns. Cam Sutton is with the Lions. Jalen Reeves-Maben is with the Lions. Hendon Hooker is with the Lions, although Hooker's not going to play much. And Byron Young is with the Rams. And Byron Young has had a heck of a rookie season. Of those, who would you guys say you're rooting for the most in the playoffs? I would say, and then there's obviously Trey Smith. Yes, I did forget about Trey Smith with the Chiefs. I apologize for that. But who do you root for the most in the playoffs? I still say, even though he got a ring, I still root for Trey Smith. I think Trey Smith is still one of the greatest stories. But my second, quite honestly, is Juwan Jennings. I think Juwan Jennings is an amazing story for Tennessee. I totally sided with him cursing out Butch Jones and the coaching staff in 2017. They were liars. He was right to call them liars. And so I am a huge fan of Juwan Jennings. But quite honestly, I think the biggest rooting interest for Tennessee should be the future of the Patriots with Jerod Mayo. And I think Jerod Mayo is just such a great guy, really smart player, immediately picked up the system for the Patriots his rookie year. And I think he's going to be a heck of a coach for the Patriots. Want to go to a few message boards. Derek Owen says Jennings is the definition of a ball for life. That is true. Mayo would have been the perfect. Smoky Mountain Red says Mayo would have been the perfect coach for Levis. Maybe that'd have been hilarious. That'd have been funny to watch. I think Mayo may know that Will Levis is not that good. But no, yeah, that's very true. Mayo would have been the perfect coach for Levis. I don't know if anybody's the perfect coach for Levis, though. I just have to be honest with you. That's all I can say with that, is I don't know for sure that Mayo is the perfect coach for Levis. But okay, we can go with that. I think for me personally, I'm rooting for, if I can just tell you who I'm rooting for Juwan Jennings and Trey Smith in these playoffs. I had a former Vols. I think those are two of the greatest Vols for life possible. Trey Smith does have a ring already. It'd be great to see Juwan Jennings get one, even though he's not the feature receiver for the 49ers. Have a lot of respect for him as a player. But Jerod Mayo is this is a really good hire. Actually, I'm going to tell you guys, as a Titans fan, I wanted the Titans to hire him. Now, as far as who the Patriots will have be their general manager, they still are in a search for that. So they won't let Jerod Mayo be the general manager. But quite honestly, I don't think it's, Bill Belichick as the GM, and those two things don't always work together. So Jerod Mayo is probably best as a head coach. If Bill Belichick was going to fail as a GM, Mayo might fail as a GM too. But I think more than this year, the biggest rooting interest for Tennessee are going to be Jerod. The biggest rooting interest for Tennessee after this year, it's not this year's playoffs. It is Jerod Mayo as head coach down the line. This is a type of guy you could start to root for the same way you rooted for Peyton Manning when he played. I mean, Jerod Mayo is that type of guy to root for. He's just such a good guy, such a selfless player, willingly sacrificed and made the switch over to middle linebacker when he was asked to in 2007 and played it superbly. I mean, again, as a player, no, he's not remembered like a Peyton Manning, Al Wilson, Reggie White, those guys. But as a leader, I mean, this is just a great situation. And remember, he never actually got to play on one of the Patriots Super Bowl teams. He was part of that run where they weren't winning Super Bowls, and then he got hurt for the year in 2014 when the Patriots won it. So he just kind of bad luck for Mayo in that regard. Similar to Eric Berry with the Chiefs, where he just kind of had bad luck and had to retire prematurely, and then the Chiefs went and won the Super Bowl. And so, but that doesn't mean that Mayo's not a great player. Eric Berry is obviously a Hall of Famer in the NFL, so you have to have a lot of respect for both of them. And so I say the biggest rooting interest is Jerod Mayo long-term as the Patriots. If you are looking for who to root for in the playoffs this year, Juwan Jennings coming back, Trey Smith again. And hey, Byron Young's had a heck of a rookie season, so watch out for him. That dude's a baller. And I mean, he could really make something of himself. And hey, maybe Hendon Hooker comes in for the Lions. Who knows? We'll have to see how that works out. But Jerod Mayo, again, I just can't say enough about him. Derek Owen asked if Jerod Mayo played as a freshman. It seems like he did. That was the 2005 season. Omar Gaither, Kevin Simon, and I believe Jason Mitchell were the starting linebackers on Tennessee in 2005. So I believe Mayo really stepped into his role in 2006. But again, that doesn't mean he wasn't a factor at all. And Darnell Wright. Yes, Darnell Wright is balling too, but Darnell Wright and the Bears are not in the playoffs. So I think that, again, how long do we think Jerod Mayo is going to last? I think this could be I think it depends on the GM. I think it depends on the GM hire for the Patriots. We can't really predict anything right now because what did Bill Belichick in is poor roster management. And that's the major, major problem with the Patriots the past few years. Belichick is still a great coach. He's just been a terrible, terrible talent evaluator. And so that's kind of the major issue with the Patriots right now. We'll have to see how that ends up working out. We're going to take a break. I'm going to see how we can handle this show going forward. If I have to finish it solo, that is okay. Obviously, thinking about everybody, if there are strong winds in East Tennessee, everybody stay safe. We don't want to, just everybody stay safe. Derek Owen says Mayo is a solid hire. Look at the tree he comes from. Yep. No, he is. He has a great coaching tree to come from, and he himself is a smart player. And so I think this is a great situation for him. When we come back, we got some college football scandals to talk about with a couple of programs that are kind of interesting and want to see how that works out. So just stick with us. We will be back in 2 minutes, and we'll see what we can get going from there.
Got cataracts? We can fix that. Never miss another moment. With a little help from Doctors Campbell, Cunningham, Taylor, and Haun at cctis.com.
Hi, I'm Rick Terry, and we at Rick Terry Jewelry Designs pride ourselves in the highest quality craftsmanship from a family-owned business here in Knoxville for over 35 years. At Rick Terry Jewelry Designs, we also take pride in being an affordable option for all your game day accessories, especially those fire opals. At Rick Terry Jewelry Designs, we want to be your jeweler every day and especially on game day. Go Vols!
Hi, Mike Davis here with City Heating and Air, reminding you to always dare to compare. Our team provides quality local heating and air service, installation, and maintenance across East Tennessee. We use only the best equipment like American Standard heating and air conditioning for your residential, new construction, or commercial needs. Honesty, dependability, and customer satisfaction have been the cornerstones of our business since 1961. City Heat and Air. Dare to compare.
We believe every day is a good day to be thirsty. With free samples on draft and lots of flavors to choose from, Tennessee Cider Company prepares a hard cider that's easy to enjoy. Some say it's the signature cider of the South. Others say it's the cure to your craving. They all say you'll savor every sip. The area of Gatlinburg has so much to offer, and so does Tennessee Cider Company. Add us to your list for shopping and fun experiences. You'll be glad you made the trip. Find our cidery in the Mountain Mall on the Gatlinburg Parkway. Sip smart. Sip the good stuff. Sip Tennessee Cider Company. Thirsty yet? Doors open at 10 a.m.
Welcome back to Off the Hook Sports. I am Caleb Calhoun. For those who are interested in what's going on, there is an issue with Dave Hooker's. There are some technical difficulties. There was a storm out in the area. I believe the power has been knocked out. You could maybe say Nick Saban and the deep state had something to do with this. I'm just saying, we were talking about Nick Saban. We were criticizing a couple of decisions Nick Saban might be making, and the deep state took Dave out. So that's just the issue that we're dealing with right now. So let's get back. Let's talk a little bit about some news in college football. We've talked a little bit about Nick Saban. We've talked about the role he could have going forward. We've talked a little bit about Tennessee, former Vols in the playoffs, where they are in the top 25. Let's talk about a scandal in college football. I want to talk about two scandals. Let's start with Georgia. I don't know if you guys see this, but Mark Schlabach of ESPN has a report out. Georgia football recruiting staffers drove after drinking, court documents allege. According to Schlabach, the article says recruiting staffers routinely drove rented vehicles after consuming alcohol, according to documents filed Thursday by attorneys representing a former staffer who was seriously injured in a January 2023 car wreck that killed a Bulldogs player and another staff member. In an amended complaint filed in state court in Gwinnett County, the attorneys also alleged that Georgia assistant football coaches used cash to pay for recruiting expenses during unofficial recruiting visits, which could be a violation of NCAA rules. The crash killed Bulldogs offensive lineman Devin Willock and recruiting staff member Chandler LaCroix. Former Georgia players Jalen Carter and LaCroix's estate were sued for damages in July. And the University of Georgia Athletic Association too. According to police, LaCroix and Carter, who by the way is now a rookie with the Eagles, were racing when the SUV being driven by LaCroix left the road and crashed into a utility pole and trees. The lawsuit said his SUV was traveling at least 104 miles an hour when it crashed and had been racing another SUV driven by Carter for 45 seconds or less. Police said LaCroix's blood alcohol concentration was 0.197, nearly 2.5 times the legal limit in Georgia. That's the staff member. Now, he apparently didn't have any permission to drive the rented SUV for personal use, according to police. But basically, during this lawsuit, the root of all of this is that UGA staffers were routinely driving drunk, according to the lawsuit, according to the documents. Basically, we're routinely driving drunk. They were routinely driving rented vehicles drunk. Guys, this is a huge scandal. Now, the question becomes, and we need to look into this now, how far up did it go? Did Kirby Smart... No, I mean, assistant coaches are named, not recruiting staffers. It says the words assistant coaches in that story. That's on-field staff coaches, okay? How high up did this go? Who were those coaches, and did Kirby Smart know? Were they aware that they were on recruiting visits driving drunk? Okay? Because now someone is dead. There's a lawsuit against the university. I don't care about the illegal cash flow happening during recruiting visits. Okay, that's a minor issue that Kirby Smart could take a slap on the wrist. I mean, Jim Harbaugh was suspended for half the season this past year and won a national title. But was he aware that recruiting staffers were driving drunk constantly? This is a huge deal, guys. This is one of the biggest scandals that could take over Georgia. It is like, this is not Penn State, don't get me wrong, where a head coach was aware of a child molester on his campus and kept him on as an assistant coach and then let him be an emeritus and have an office on campus 13 years after he found out that he was a child molester. Okay, it's not that. But it's still pretty bad. If you know your staffers, guys, these are recruiting staffers. If anybody's on the road all the time, it's recruiting staffers. So if anybody should be held to a standard of being responsible when they're driving, it's recruiting staffers. And if Kirby Smart is aware that this was happening and did nothing about it, yeah, this could derail him. This is a very bad look. For the longest time, we were just saying, I personally was thinking that Kirby Smart was just having discipline issues and it could derail the program and you can't get it back when it happens. And that has happened. When Dave's on, he can tell you about it. Philip Fulmer in the early 2000s let the program get away from him discipline-wise. But it's different from letting the program get away from you discipline-wise, but then organizationally allowing and knowing that there is drunk driving happening by recruiting staffers on the road. That puts people's lives at risk. Someone is dead right now because of it. Okay, this could get really, really, really bad. And I don't know how, guys, this could be scratching the surface of a really big scandal, okay? And if it does, the question becomes, what happens with Georgia at that point? What happens with Kirby Smart? Do you let it slide? Do you let it go? Does Kirby Smart pull an Urban Meyer and just decide to fake a health issue and retire? I don't think so. I think Georgia's all in with Kirby Smart. I will say, for those who have covered the Georgia football program for years, this is a 180 from the program under Mark Richt. Now, you expect some character issues in a program that's winning a lot. It just happens. Even Nick Saban in Alabama had a few. But at the same time, you also expect, when you look at Georgia, one of the things that held Mark Richt back from winning a national title was they had very strict integrity standards when Mark Richt was there. So that's that's something that somewhat held them back. And I personally believe they kind of got sick of that. And when Kirby got hired, they're like, let's throw it all to the wayside. And maybe it went a little bit too far. So the question becomes, Smoky Mountain Red asked this question, is Kirby touchable though? Right here. See, that's the biggest question. When these scandals typically break, I don't know a coach who was fired when he was at the top of his game when a scandal like this broke. I mean, you could maybe say Hugh Freeze at Ole Miss, but Hugh Freeze's last year was a bad year at Ole Miss. Bruce Pearl at Tennessee was fired at the top of his game for the most minor violation possible. Lied about a violation that's not even a violation anymore. But the program had already Ed Orgeron. The program had already started to slide under him, and also nobody actually thought Ed Orgeron was responsible for that national title in 2019. So that was an easy fire. Most scandalous possible, Joe Paterno. Joe Paterno hadn't coached a game really in 15 years. He sat with his legs propped up in one. Go back and watch that Outback Bowl in 2006. Joe Paterno was in the press box, legs propped up, not even wearing a headset, and got credit for the win. Joe Paterno was a figurehead, letting everybody else do the work. And so I don't think it was as hard to fire him. He was there just for being beloved. Kirby is more at the top of his game. Even and Urban Meyer was never actually fired, but Urban Meyer did leave 2 places under pressure. But Kirby's at the top of his game right now. You do wonder what happens with Georgia if they would take a stand on Kirby. Now, this is a lawsuit. We don't know anything right now. More could come out, but that's my question. That's my first question. Did Kirby Smart know his recruiting staffers were driving drunk? Were they driving drunk? These are just in court documents. So these aren't actually confirmed 100% true, but they are being alleged and they are filed in official court documents now that recruiting staffers routinely drove drunk. That's a big issue, guys. And so the best one so far, Ghost of General Nealon. Kirby needs to bring Urban in to put the discipline in place. That's a good one. So I have to say that I think we need to reserve judgment and sit back, but I think we should be asking questions about this one. This is something we should be asking questions about, and we should be pursuing this further. And the public, the media, and definitely the courts and investigators even should be looking into this, because if you know your recruits are driving drunk and you aren't doing anything about it and you aren't handling it, at least internally, yeah, you should be held severely accountable for that. And I mean, I think that at that point, the lawsuit could extend not just to the University of Georgia, but directly to Kirby Smart, directly to staff members. Now, maybe he didn't know. Maybe he's going to be completely washed clean of this, the same way Jim Harbaugh didn't know about the sign stealing scandal at Michigan. Okay, maybe he will be completely washed clean, but I just have to say that this is a dangerous, dangerous situation. And it's one that, one of the things you guys have to understand about lack of discipline, depending on how serious it gets, it casts a cloud over your program far beyond you. One, it hurts you, because once that gets out, it gets really hard to recruit at a high level and be selective anymore, because parents and guardians of kids will see these things and they'll sit there and say, that say you're the guardian or the parent, but guardian too, or a high school coach of a kid who maybe has a rough background, and you're really trying to steer him. You're the guy that's probably going to have the biggest impact steering him on which school he goes to. And you really want him to get out of his rough background. You're going to steer him away from a school that isn't very strong with discipline because you're worried about his future. This happened in football. Okay, this has happened everywhere. This happened to Tennessee. Coaches steered people away from Tennessee, and parents steered their kids away from Tennessee because they were worried that their kids could get wrapped up in things. Happened at Miami. I mean, that's the reason Miami hasn't recovered to this day from its discipline issues. Happened at Florida with Urban Meyer. Again, parents and guardians and coaches who had kids that they were worried about, they tried to steer those kids away from those schools because they knew that wouldn't be the right environment for them to really succeed going long term. And so it is going to be a big deal if this comes out. If you find out that Kirby Smart is letting people recklessly race all the time, this is a really, really big deal. And I don't know how it's going to end up, but I am going to say that Kirby Smart and Georgia, this could be scratching the surface of something right now. And it could be something that turns out to be disastrous long-term. So we're just going to have to keep an eye on this. Finally, before we get out of here, one more scandal, a little bit lighter, but this one's freaking hilarious. Florida State football assistants get a 3-game ban for NCAA violations. According to Dan Murphy at ESPN, the NCAA on Thursday announced significant penalties for the Florida State football team, including 2 years probation and disassociating with its NIL collective for 1 season for violating rules on using name, image, and likeness offers as a recruiting inducement. In addition, an FSU assistant coach, which sources confirmed to ESPN as offensive coordinator Alex Atkins, was suspended for 3 games for his involvement. The university must also disassociate with a specific booster for 3 years. This is the first time the NCAA has severed the relationship between a school and its NIL collective as part of an infractions case. All right, guys, this story is hilarious. How do you manage to commit violations in this era of the wild, wild west of college football, where NIL is legal? Only Florida State could do this. Now, we all made fun of Jeremy Pruitt for committing his violations before NIL came into play. That was laughable at the time, because if he had just waited a year to cheat, he could have done it openly, and instead he's fired for doing something that's no longer illegal. Florida State commits NIL violations. How do you violate NIL rules? They're being used on the recruiting trail all the time. According to the rules, there was a meeting where a booster offered a prospect $15,000 a month and encouraged him to play for the Seminoles. Technically, the NIL can't be used in recruiting. It's used in recruiting. You just can't get caught. This was way too obvious. Only Florida State could be that incompetent. But I want to ask this question to the message board. While Florida State could have been smarter with how they did this, do you guys think that Florida State's being targeted by the NCAA right now? Are they being targeted because they showed up the NCAA by purposely getting blown out in in their bowl game? And this is an honest question. Is the NCAA upset with them? With the way they acted in their anger, trying to discredit the college football playoff for getting left out, and then purposely not showing up for their bowl game to humiliate the college football playoff committee? Are they being targeted? Because this just seems a little odd. Dave could tell you more about this because he's tied to Tennessee, but Tennessee's definitely outbid people for recruits and transfers on the NIL market. Okay, that's been happening all over college football. So it's a little weird that Florida State would get in trouble for this. Now, they were so blatant. They had a meeting with the booster. That wasn't smart. I'll be the first to tell you that wasn't smart. But would they have done this if Tennessee did it, or if Alabama did it, or if Michigan did it, or if Ohio State did it? Maybe Michigan, because Michigan's gotten in so much trouble as it is. But Florida State, it seems like there's a bit of an agenda against Florida State because of how they embarrassed the NCAA this past year by not showing up for the Orange Bowl. That, I think people wanted to see some real ratings out of that. Florida State saying they belonged, trying to prove it by playing an undefeated Georgia. I'm sorry, a one-loss Georgia, who we all knew was better. And Florida State said, we're not going to play your game. We're going to show up the NCAA, not show up and get blown out. It's actually similar to, there was one year where the funny story, just quick side note, the NBA one year tried to set up the Spurs. This was during the Tim Duncan Miami Heat rivalry in the 2013-2014, where they played in the finals back-to-back years. They tried to set up a scenario where the Spurs would play the Heat. It was like the second road game of a back-to-back with they had played 6 games in 11 days, and the Heat had 3 days off, and it was at Miami on national TV, and they were trying to set it up where Miami would clearly win with those. So Greg Popovich, to show up the NBA, rested all his starters that game for a nationally televised game and just to humiliate the NBA. It was kind of one of the funniest things possible. So the Lewis family says this is payback to FSU. Yeah, I probably agree with you. I think this is a little bit of payback for them showing up the NCAA in college football. Rocky Top Tom says definitely wouldn't have hit Ohio State, Georgia, or Alabama for this. The NCAA is sore over FSU exposing the massive problems NIL, transfer portal, and playoffs are creating. I kind of agree with you. Now, I disagree with you, Rocky Top Tom, about NIL and transfer portal. I don't think it's handled right. I agree with you. There are problems. I think it can be handled right and regulated better. I do. But right now, the NCAA is called flat-footed. And it's their fault because they didn't get out in front of this. And so that's kind of the issue with that. So Florida State, does this really mean anything? I don't think so. The only question becomes, Mike Norvell a candidate for Alabama, the head coaching job at Alabama? Does Mike Norvell, one, was he really a candidate? But two, if he is this going to hold him back at all? I mean, in an age of NIL, I don't think so. Alabama's a lot more responsible with their boosters. But I want to ask you guys this. All right, so Alabama's been burned by Mike Price with the whole coach in the hotel room and the stripper in the hotel. They got a lot of recruiting violations in the 90s. Alabama's a major school, though, with probably some of the largest boosters. Not like Tennessee level, but pretty large. Definitely not as desperate as an Auburn was or even an Ole Miss. Do you think Alabama, more so than those other schools, will demand a little bit of personal conduct from its head coach the way Ole Miss probably doesn't care with Lane Kiffin or Auburn doesn't care with Bruce Pearl or Hugh Freeze? Do you guys think they're going to take that into account, which would nix their potential to hire Bobby Petrino, Lane Kiffin, and maybe even Mike Norvell? Do you guys think that Alabama has a personal conduct standard for its coach that might be higher than other schools would have? Just kind of a thought. I wanted to get y'all's thoughts on that. Notre Dame absolutely has a personal conduct standard for its coaches and for its athletes. I know some other schools do. Would Alabama sit there and say we've been burned by a coach using our dollars on strippers, and we've had boosters that have been corrupt that got us on probation and in trouble? Rocky Top Tom says maybe. We know Georgia doesn't. Well, to be fair, Georgia did for a while, and then they got tired of not winning a national title. The Lewis family says Lane has grown up a lot. Yes, but the age of the women he's interested in has not. Okay, so Colton Ditmore says, so Butch Jones is out. That's a case of low character and bad coach. But yes, that's a funny one. I think they do. And I think that would hold Lane. I think that would hold Lane Kiffin out a little more. That would hurt him from getting the job. Record Tom says, I think Alabama not handling the thug hitting our girl last year is exemplary of their standards. Well, Record Tom, look, I have to be honest with you. I'm a little mixed on that. Yeah, you should never hit a woman. Ever, ever, ever. You're a player. Be responsible. However, if you are somebody who storms the field, once you jump onto the field, once you jump onto the court, you have entered the arena of somebody else. It's the same thing where someone breaks into my home, girl or not, I got the right to hit them. Okay? Like that is, there was a clear barrier meant for the field of play and the stands. And I actually think you can make a strong case that storming the field is an act of rioting because it puts a lot of people in danger if you really look at it. We are really, if we keep allowing field storming, guys, there's going to be an instance where someone gets killed. It's not going to be a player. It's not going to be an athlete. Don't worry. But there is going to be an instance where someone gets killed. It's very dangerous. And so I think that we have to be very, very careful. It's not about whether or not the kid was in danger. He wasn't. However, once you enter the field once you run onto a field, once you run onto a court, you open yourself up. You're not protected. You don't have the right to be protected at that point. So I gotta be honest with you. That's the way I look at it. Your rights end when you step on their field or when you step on their court. All right. Period. End of story. You step on that, your rights end. And I didn't say it. I'm not saying what the Alabama player did was right. He shouldn't have hit the woman. That was wrong. That was terrible. And he should have been disciplined for it. I am saying from the other side, You don't get the right to be protected once you step on the field or the court. It's that simple. You don't. You chose to do it. And so that's kind of the way I look at it. Your rights end when you step on their field or their court. Your protection end when you step on their field or their court. You break into someone's home, your rights end. It's just that simple. So that's the way I've always been. You guys can disagree with me on that. That doesn't mean I'm not saying don't storm the field. I'm just saying that if you choose to storm the field, you should not get any sort of protection once you step onto the field. That's all I'm saying. And for those who disagree with me, look at how the legal situation played out with the Pacers Pistons brawl of 2004 when Ron Artest went into the stands. Artest should have been charged. He went into the stands. He broke the barrier the other way. However, there were people who went onto the court to try to fight some of the NBA players, and they got draxed, including the guy that Jermaine O'Neal punched, and that guy got charged. Guess why? Because he went onto the court. Shouldn't have gone onto the court. I felt no sympathy for Jermaine O'Neal punching him and knocking him out whatsoever. The guy who threw the cup of beer at Ron Artest, felt no sympathy for him getting charged and getting banned from the NBA for life. Okay? And so that's all I got to say on that. Now, thank you guys for tuning in to the show today. I know that we had a lot of issues with Dave Hooker being on or off. Obviously, Dave Hooker had some electrical issues, some power issues. I do believe that we hope this kind of works out in the end. I want to thank you guys all for sticking with me. This was really rough to do on my own today. We didn't really plan it, but I want to give everybody a break. I want everybody to give Dave a break. There's a lot of power issues in East Tennessee right now. So we're going to have to see how this works out in the end. But again, thank you guys all for tuning in. This was real tricky. Didn't plan this, obviously, during a breaking news period. So you guys have a great rest of your day. We will be back on Monday. Again, tune in every day from 10 a.m. at 10 a.m. Eastern for our Monday through Friday podcast. Hit that like and subscribe button. Ring the bell. Turn the notifications on. Tell a friend. This has been a fun ride. This is a lot more difficult than it usually is. So you guys have a great one. With Caleb Calhoun and Dave Hooker, this has been a presentation of Off the Hook Sports.